This is Sally. She watches 6 hours of true crime podcasts a day. And this is John. He watches 6 hours of the most violent historical war documentaries every single day. But why in the hell would anyone do this? I mean, how can you enjoy watching so much human suffering? Well, you might just think that they hate themselves, but the truth is, humans, we just love negative things. And if you don't believe that, just try this small experiment on yourself. Try to remember a memory of a teacher from your primary or elementary school. The chances are it's the teacher that you despise the most. But our love for negativity comes at a pretty big cost. But before we click off this video, I think it's very important for you to understand why we have such a strong negativity bias, which is just a fancy way of saying we are so attracted to negative things. Because after doing hours of research, looking through research paper after research paper, a bunch of psychological theories, and just looking at my own personal experiences, I realized that our negativity bias completely changes how we think, how we behave, our social relationships, and so much more. Although not necessarily for the right reasons. But fortunately, you can change that. But before I get into that, there's one more thing I need to say, because I'm pretty sure I know what some of you are thinking. Actually, I'm a very positive person. And yeah, that's probably true. But you're most likely just comparing yourself to other human beings. Because in reality, practically all of us view the world more negatively than positively. And if you don't believe me, just listen for a few minutes because I got a bunch of data to back this up. So there's this one study that showed people 3 images: a negative image, a positive image, and a neutral image. Let's just pretend that the neutral image was a bridge, the negative image was a tombstone, and the positive image was a picture of a festival or something. Essentially, the study found that people paid way more attention to the negative image than the positive one. But our love for bad things goes way deeper than just images. You can actually see it in how our brain activates. Because there's this pretty big study from Yale that showed that not only do negative things grab our attention faster, but they also activate so much more of the brain. So when you combine that with the psychological idea that neurons that fire together wire together, you can kind of see why we remember bad things way more than good things. Now, this concept of neurons that fire together, wire together, can be broken up into 3 things. The first point you gotta understand is that our brains are essentially a collection of neurons. And when our brain is active, these neurons are firing a lot of electrical signals. But the key idea here is that during similar experiences, the same neurons activate. Like when you trip while walking, many of the same neurons are gonna fire as when you fall off a bike. And because these experiences are usually negative, your brain fires a lot of neurons. But then there's the second half, the neurons wire together part. And this is the idea that if we have a lot of neurons that always fire together, they eventually wire together. And this means that they create strong connections in the brain. And these strong connections between neurons can be very loosely thought of as memories. So essentially, because negative things activate so much of the brain, you remember them more. And this is part of the reason why we just love negative things so damn much. I mean, just think about it. If you're listening to a true crime podcast or watching a violent horror movie, your brain is very, very active. The amygdala is super active, so is the anterior cortex, and a lot more. And this makes you really alert and awake. And this can be so addictive and thrilling. But what's even stranger is that people manage bad moods with negative media. Like this one study from UC Davis followed 500 people during the pandemic. They watched people flip through channels, scroll through subscription services like Netflix, and just choices in general in regards to media. And they realized that people in bad moods were more likely to watch negative things and things that are high in arousal. So this would be things like action movies, thrillers, horror films, disaster coverage, and a lot more. But the interesting part is that researchers concluded that people do this to heighten their bad mood, which at first seems really weird, but after thinking about it, I actually kind of do this frequently. And I'm sure if you stop and think about it, at least a few of you do as well. So that explains why we love negative things, but how does loving negative things change our lives? Well, as I said before, it can definitely make our lives worse, but a lot of the time, it actually improves our life. In fact, it has kept us alive for centuries. And this will make perfect sense if you just take a moment and imagine yourself as a caveman or a cavewoman. I know this sounds strange, but just use your imagination here. Let's say you were going for a walk outside of your cave somewhat early in the morning, and you saw a beautiful sunrise, but behind you there's a big red tiger slowly walking up, each paw one at a time. Would it be better to stay focused on the sunset or run away from the tiger behind you? It's pretty obvious. You should run for the tiger. And this is essentially the things humans have been doing for thousands of centuries. A lot of people like to call it the safe but not sorry approach to human evolution, and this is literally a phrase we still use today. Like, the idea is that it's technically okay to ignore positive things like the sunset, but you cannot ignore negative stuff, because if you ignore that, you could be dead. And remember that this has been enforced in our brains for thousands of centuries. So it's completely changed how we think and the decisions we make every day. I mean, essentially what this says is that no matter how much people like to say that humans are risk takers, the truth is we're probably much more risk adverse than we are risk taking. Like, when we are making a decision, let's say moving to a new country, we might consider the positives and the negatives, but usually we'll weigh the negatives more than the positives. And to be clear, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because yes, taking risks help us grow and learn, but at the same time, taking risks leads to a lot of unknown danger. So the point here isn't that we shouldn't take risks or that we should take more risks, but that we should understand our negativity bias when making decisions. But one of the biggest ways this bias impacts us has to do with how we live our social lives. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about our social lives is because humans are social creatures. We didn't evolve in isolation like so many other animals. We need to belong, and we need to be in social groups. We get a lot out of social groups. We get access to resources and a bunch of other things. I mean, we don't even have to think about it from a caveman perspective to understand this. Just look at your job search. Usually, it's not the most qualified candidate that gets the job. It's the one that has a connection inside the company. And it's not just that. Being in social groups also give us access to potential partners. You know, people know people who know people, and so on. And no matter how independent we all want to be in our lives, including myself, we need at least some strong social connections to be happy. Don't just take my word for it. There are thousands of studies, psychological theories, that prove this exact point. Too many that I can't even list them all today. Now, the reason I went on this tangent is because it shows how much power our negativity bias can have on our happiness. I mean, if our social relationships are so important to our happiness, and our negativity bias impacts our social relationship, our negativity bias must have a strong impact on our happiness. And this makes perfect sense once you realize that one bad experience has much more impact on us than one good experience. I feel like this is pretty self-explanatory. Like, most of us probably remember more insults people have thrown at us compared to all the good experience we've had socially. And maybe this is why first impressions are so important. Because it's not necessarily that we need to have a good first impression, but it's that we should probably avoid having a bad first impression. Because people remember a bad first impression much more than a good one. But from a more general perspective, it explains why all the negative things other people tell us can hurt us so much and stay in our minds for so long. Because not only do humans have a negative bias, but they also need strong social relationships to survive. So we have to pay attention to the insults people tell us, because it can damage our social reputation and, more importantly, how other people think of us. And as I said before, we get a lot from our social connections, from job opportunities to protections from potential enemies. But I also feel like this idea explains how we should manage our social relationships. Now, to be clear, I am not a relationship expert, but if humans have a negative bias in general, we probably need to have way more positive moments than negative moments to maintain strong social relationships. And this was sort of proven by Dr. Gottman and Robert Levinson. They essentially performed a really long study that came up with this idea of the 5-to-1 ratio, which is that healthy relationships need 5 good moments for every 1 bad moment to be successful. But there's just something else I have to say, because it's actually highly related to what I'm talking about right now, and that's social media. So this is pretty important because it's a good explanation of how our negativity bias can make our lives a lot worse. So the thing is, social media uses our negativity bias really well. Just think about it. Social media lets you have a ton of social connections all in the palm of your hand. And because we naturally remember negative things so easily, it's pretty clear why a lot of studies showed that negativity spreads so easily on social media. I mean, there was this time just a couple months ago where I was scrolling through Instagram. I saw a random beef between 2 random athletes. And you know what happens next. I just click on the comment section and without thinking, just start scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And all of that negativity in my brain it's just so stimulating. And while I don't have that many papers to back this up, I would say that it's definitely much easier to doom scroll on negative content. It's just so addicting. And it's sort of like a cycle. I mean, because of evolution, we are already so biased towards negativity. And this makes us so much more likely to spot and remember negative things. And every time we spot negative things, we get better at spotting negative things in the future. This comes from the neurons that fire together, wire together concept that we talked about earlier. But we can change this bias. I mean, trying to erase thousands of years of evolution is hard, but we can take small steps to at least reduce this bias. Now, before I get into that, I just want to say that I am not a healthcare professional, so please speak to someone that is, or someone else before doing any of this. That being said, by just simply being aware of our negativity bias, we can become less negative. I mean, let's say that you became angry in a few days over something someone told you and you couldn't understand why it's affecting you so much. Well, instead of being upset at yourself for caring so much or getting pissed at the person who insulted you, you can just explain that away by saying you're human. You just love negative things. But there are also some mindfulness and gratitude practices that have been shown to help. One good idea I saw is to try to flip your mindset. So instead of trying to stop yourself from caring about negative things, we can instead try to pay more attention to the positive things in our life. Like maybe just writing down a few happy things that happen to you once a day. Now, before I end this video, I just want to say one important thing. So you've probably realized that I focused a lot on the problems with humans being negative. But that's just me showing my own negativity bias. Because remember, our negativity bias is often a really good thing. It's literally life-saving. Like, remember, there's a reason we remember more bad things than good things. We learn a lot from bad things. So remember that as well.